Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan is a truly remarkable novel. This is a miracle of literary fiction. But I do want to start this video off by getting a bit angry and annoyed. A few years ago, I used to have a Goodreads account, and I got rid of it because I found Goodreads kind of stressful with people monitoring what you're reading and how long it takes to finish a book and stuff like that. But then I started to miss it, so I got it again recently. And that's been kind of a double-edged sword because I now look at other people's reviews and get annoyed if they're wrong. And that happened a lot with this. I was snooping around the Goodreads reviews of this, and a lot of the most popular and liked reviews of this book really missed the mark. They kept talking about how this book is kind of twee and wholesome, and how it's very reminiscent of the classic Christmas film It's a Wonderful Life. And it's not. It's not those things. It's not a twee and wholesome story at all. It's a positive story, kind of, but no. Like, those people are very wrong. So let's talk about what this book actually is, and why it's actually incredible. Small Things Like These is set at Christmas time. So, tick, there's one comparison to It's a Wonderful Life. But I think that'll do. It's set in 1985 in a small community in Ireland. And at its heart, this is a book about the everyday kindness of ordinary people and the ways in which kindness is infectious and good deeds beget good deeds, etc. Versus the ironically sinful, monstrous, damning and despicable, hypocritical actions of organized religion. That's the important takeaway about this book, is that Small Things Like These is a book that condemns the church, condemns the actions of organized religion, and just as importantly, condemns the fact that communities that are kind of led by the church and led by tradition are complicit in the monstrous acts perpetrated by the church. And too many reviews seem to have overlooked that, which baffles me. So as I said, this is set in 1985 in a small community in Ireland in the run-up to Christmas. Our protagonist is a 40-year-old man named Bill Furlong. He's a working-class guy. He's the manager of a coal and timber merchants. He's got a few employees, and he spends the book delivering coal and timber to the local people, most of whom know him, and also planning with his wife the presents that they're going to get for their kids. They have 5 daughters. Around the midpoint of the book, the daughters all write their Christmas letters to Santa, and it's very sweet. And Bill and his wife have to figure out what they're going to do with the money that they have to try and make their daughters happy. So those are the kind of wholesome and sweet aspects of the book. But we also spend a lot of time in Bill's memories. This is a very tiny book. It's 110 pages long, and so much happens in it, including multiple flashbacks to when Bill was a kid. Bill's mother was a working class woman, and she worked as a kind of cleaner or a maid for this wealthy woman who lives in a big house on the edge of the village. Bill's mother got pregnant very young and very unexpectedly. She either doesn't know or never reveals who Bill's father was. But this is a time and place where being pregnant out of wedlock is going to send you down a very dark path. Luckily, Bill's mother's employer is a wealthy and kind and sort of lonely woman who takes them in. Bill and his mother live in their house, and Bill is raised by his mother, also kind of raised by this kindly woman, and also raised by the other people who work there. He was saved from a very, very bad life, and actually kind of luckily given a particularly nice one where he learned good morals and good behavior, and no mention of religious influence is there at all. Conversely, this is a village of very traditionally God-fearing people who all go to mass on Sundays. They listen to the word of God, and they talk a lot about Christian stuff. As you can probably tell, I wasn't raised religious, I am not religious, and so when it comes to terminology and traditions and habits, I really don't know my stuff. But I did go to a Church of England primary school, because that was the only one near my home. I did sing hymns, I do remember doing the Lord's Prayer, and I also grew up in Britain, which is a country that has been moulded by the church and its traditions, therefore I know enough. Anyway, Bill's a good guy. That's an important aspect to the book, obviously. He's our protagonist, and he is a fundamentally good and kind working class dad. He looks after his daughters, he looks after his wife, being good and supportive, a strong member of the community, a reliable dad. These are all things that are really important to him. He's fundamentally good. He's been raised that way through kindness above all else. His mother was kind, the woman who took him and his mother in was kind, and there was also a man who worked on the property who kind of worked as a father figure for him. So Bill learned good behavior, good manners, kindness, understanding, empathy. He took all those on board, and he grew into a good father and a good man because of it. Then you have the church and its influence on the community. This is a small, rural community of people who like to gossip. Everyone knows everyone, and Bill, throughout the novel, starts butting heads with the church itself. I'm going to talk about one thing that happens maybe just beyond the midpoint. It's a very, very short book, and therefore it's kind of difficult to avoid spoilers, but there are revelations towards the end that I'm not going to touch at all. But this moment that happens around the midpoint, I'm now going to talk about. Bill goes to drop some wood and coal off at the local convent? I think that's what they're called. Place where there are nuns and maybe monks, church people. This convent has taken in a large number of girls from around the country, or at least around the county. And these girls are working as slave labor at the convent. When he first arrives there, he goes there a few times, and on his first visit, the girls literally beg him to help them escape. They'll do anything, say anything, just please get me out of here. They're miserable, they're not eating well, and they're working themselves to the bone. But on this one visit, around halfway through the book, he goes to the coal shed, and he finds a girl locked in there. He's confused, he's scared, and he wants to help her. He ends up talking to the Mother Superior, who I think is the head nun. I'm not very good with this stuff. And they chat about morals and ethics and do the literary fiction thing. And ultimately it becomes very clear that this is a book about how the church is a hypocritical, sinful, horrible place that treats kids like shit. We learn more about the girl in the coal shed, and it gets darker and darker as it goes. And Bill ultimately is a shining example of how our morals, our ethics are taught to us, irrespective of the existence of a religious institution. This would be a really valuable book for people to read if they believe that it's the Bible that gives you your moral compass, your moral code, which I've always thought is a completely ludicrous concept for thousands of reasons. The most basic being that we are mammals, we are pack animals, and being good-natured and supportive in a family way, in a community way, is in our blood, it's in our instincts, it's a survival technique. You're more likely to survive if you are a strong group. Therefore, it's a moral imperative that we are good to each other in order to survive. Then there's the question of what about all of the other cultures, nations, religions, all throughout history, ones that exist today and ones that previously existed or have existed for so long, like China is 5,000 plus years old. They didn't have Jesus. It's wild. It's gnarly. The idea that like the Bible is the only thing that keeps people good. This book, though, would be such a good thing for those people to read. Bill learned good morals and kindness from kind people who did kind things and showed him how to be kind, while the church is doing horrible, brutal things to young girls. Its treatment of children is horrific, and the community is complicit in that. The silence of the community, the way that they just follow the rules and the traditions and the habits of the church means that they are complicit through their silence. And there's a really subtle moment before all of this really kicks off that hit me immediately. And it's when Bill and his wife are sitting up in bed having a chat before they go to sleep, talking about the kids, blah, blah, blah. And Bill always gives a little bit of change to any homeless people, any beggars he sees on the street. He sees a beggar, he tosses them a coin. And his wife is annoyed by that, and then goes on to talk about how important it is that they go to mass the next day. Like, what the fuck? The hypocrisy is laid bare immediately. People who believe it is good and right to go to church, but disagree with the idea of giving the homeless a helping hand. Hypocrisy, disgraceful behavior, morally bankrupt. Bill's wife is complicit, and we see that moment long before we see this argument between Bill and the Mother Superior, long before we get to know about these girls at the convent, before any of that. We immediately see the logical inconsistency between goodness and being a God-fearing person. It's absolutely brilliant. And beyond all of that, this is also just a very compelling book about a good man with some fantastic Irish dialogue If you've read a lot of Irish literature or watched a few Irish films, you know what I mean when I say Irish dialogue. The unique ways in which people within a small community talk to each other is very electric, very compelling, very Moorish. Go watch The Banshees of Inisherin and you'll immediately know what I mean. The ways in which people in small Irish communities communicate with each other, chat with each other, whether it be small talk or big topics. It is so endearing. And you see that in the dialogue of this book as well. Beautifully communicated lines of dialogue by really compelling and diverse characters. And Bill at the center of it all, being a good man in arguably a bad place. A place made bad by the hypocrisies of organized religion. You could honestly argue that this is a radical book. A book about goodness and kindness, and a book that looks at the truth of the hypocrisies of organized religion. Remarkable. This is a remarkable piece of literary fiction by an amazing writer. And I should also mention, this is my first Claire Keegan book. I've never read her before, and now I need to read everything she's ever written and will ever write. Utterly amazing. Please read this and subscribe for books.